Hi everyone, so my name is Eleni Wolf, and today I'm going to reflect on an ethical dilemma that really challenged my thinking about access and responsibility in higher education. This came out of an interview I conducted with Melissa, the Assistant Director of the Student Access Center at MSU Denver, and it really pushed me to rethink where access begins and what we owe our students beyond the boundaries of our campuses. Melissa serves students with disabilities on an urban commuter campus, and she faces a very real, very complicated ethical tension. What happens when access stops at the edge of our campuses? Even with the best accommodations on campus, students still struggle just to get there. That's the heart of this dilemma, and it really made me reflect, in her place, what would I have done, and how would I have responded? So what is access? Melissa and I started our conversation by talking about what access really means in higher education. We both agreed it's not just about accommodations within a classroom. Access means creating equitable opportunities for all students to fully participate in the college experience, academically, physically, and socially, without barriers. This framing is so important because it highlights how access is about participation and belonging, not just legal compliance. So something that we don't really look into or consider when talking about accommodations is how do they get there? For us, being a commuter campus at MSU Denver, I feel like this is really important to look at. So Melissa described this physical challenges surrounding the campus as cracked pavements, missing ramps, poor snow removal, and inconsistent and inaccessible public transportation. I feel like even though students had accommodations once they arrived, for some, getting to class was nearly impossible. And I feel like this is important more so now. And I think if you can't get to class, does it matter if it's accessible when you arrive? This question reframed how I think about access. If I had been in her position, this would have felt unacceptable to me, and I would feel obligated to address it somehow. And I feel like that's where it gets super hard because for students with accommodations, you can only do so much, especially when you do work at a campus within the city. There are so many legal complications that you kind of have to go through in order to make sure that students are going to be successful, especially when they are coming on campus. So here's kind of where the ethical problem comes. And this is where it gets a little tricky, is whose problem is it anyway? So the university is legally compliant, the city owns the sidewalks and transit, and students are caught in the middle. I feel like something that I talked with Melissa about was how do we help students in this situation? And what's hard is sometimes it really is out of our control and that's something that we can't help. But it can be really hard because something that Melissa said was, we want to help, but we don't own the pavement. And that's where that not having control comes from. Because if we don't have control over certain things, that's not something that we can really do to help our students. But something that we can do is kind of creating like a partnership with like the city, and how can we create that partnership in a way that helps the student succeed, especially when it comes to college. This is where the ethical complexity really comes in. I feel like, is this the city's responsibility? The universities? Should students have to figure it out themselves? Melissa was facing what Nash would call a bumpy road, so I played Nash's 9 to unpack it. So if we look at stakeholders, conflicting values, equity versus jurisdiction, inclusion versus logistics. My intuition, Nash teaches us to listen to our gut, and like Melissa, mine says it's wrong to ignore this. And action options, ignore the problem, partner with the city, or create workarounds. I feel like if I were in Melissa's role, I wouldn't have been able to leave this unaddressed. I would have started by listening to students' experiences and reaching out to the city and campus leadership, and ignoring it would never sit right with me either. This dilemma highlights how legal compliance doesn't always equal ethical practice. The ADA sets a legal minimum, but as professionals guided by ACPA or NASPA competencies and the CAF standards, we're called to go beyond accommodation and advocate for barrier removal. Melissa knew this, and Nash reminds us to ask, what is my professional role demand of me? In her position and in my future practice, I believe the answer is clear: to challenge systems that perpetrate exclusion even when it's outside our job descriptions. So doing the right thing even when it's not our job. So some of Melissa's actions that she did when it came to this ethical dilemma is that she collected student feedback, she engaged in city departments and still continues to do so, and she built cross-sector partnerships. And the result that came from that is students feel heard and systematic change starts taking shape. So my take on this, I think access starts before the classroom. For one, I think true access includes safe, independent arrival. The second thing is I think we must advocate beyond our offices and buildings. And the resolution, I feel like there's no perfect answer, but I feel like progress is ethical action. I think what I mean by this is there's always never going to be a perfect solution. And I think that's what's good about having ethical dilemmas is that you're willing to jump into things that may scare you or that, you never even knew was an ethical dilemma. But it's something that you can really do to help students out and help students thrive, especially in a college environment. So when completing this assignment and doing the interview with Melissa, there were 3 things that I learned. Number 1, doing enough means looking beyond boundaries. Number 2, ethics in student affairs isn't passive, it's persistent. And number 3, we are advocates, connectors, and change makers, even in the gray areas. As future student affairs professionals, our call to action is that we need to think beyond just compliance. Access is about belonging and opportunity, and it requires us to challenge systems that create invisible obstacles. What are we doing to remove those barriers?